All right, perfect. Looks like it's all good. Okay, let's begin. Right. Do you ever get confused with so much good information out there when it comes to health and nutrition? Because people often come up to me and tell me that they're paleo, vegan, keto, carnivore, and oftentimes the most common questions that I get is about not the diet that they're following, but another diet that they probably want to follow. And most of the reason is because people see different results that other people are getting in social media channels or in their communities. And if you have followed my journey for some time, you know that I have been on paleo, vegan, carnivore, and especially with my other Instagram account, which, by the way, is not active. I'm not using that anymore. But I've come across a new term which I saw floating around, but I never dived deep into, and it is called Keto. And today I've got someone special on the show. Our guest on the show today has been an athlete. He's studied psychology, he's studied body language and nutrition. He is a coach and also works full time at a corporate life, which makes his story and his ways relate to most of us. And above all, he's a father and is looking to help improve the life of others. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome on the show today, Matthew Stephens. Hello,
Hi.
Matthew. Welcome.
Hi, how are you?
I'm great. Thank you. Thanks so much for coming on the show today. Now, tell me, I just want to straight get into the question. What is keto?
Okay, it's not too complicated, really. I think
Mm-hmm,
a lot of people who follow you will obviously know the terms keto and carnivore.
mm-hmm,
It really is somewhere in the middle. And I guess if I explain it in a journey sort of sense, I think a lot of people progress from a keto based way of eating onto carnivore
mm-hmm,
as they study. And I did that same path. So went from keto to carnivore for various reasons. Um, and then eventually felt that I needed a little bit more variety than just carnivore, and
mm-hmm,
researched very much into what foods worked, were anti-inflammatory, and could allow that little bit more flexibility. So ultimately, keto is a carnivore-based way of eating with limited other foodstuffs that have got less chance of irritating you or causing issues.
mm-hmm. I did try to go on carnivore for almost a month. This was last year, but then in all sense, it just got very boring for me because you only have to eat meat and eggs. And the problem that I ran into was that I wasn't able to source grass-fed and grass finish or pasture-raised meat in Dubai, because this was at the time of when the whole economy was shut down. We were in our houses, so that kind of like led me to go back into keto. But I've been doing keto for so many years, and when I see the benefits of both of these, like going on carnivore and going on keto, an approach that would combine them together probably has so much more that we can explore. So do you, in the carnivore diet, for people who are listening, you're not allowed to have fruits, vegetables, grains. And on keto, you are allowed to have some vegetables, but they're limited because you cannot have anything with starches because they would increase your carbohydrate load. And if you're active, you want to keep under 50 grams of carbohydrates to get into ketosis over a period of time. Now, the people who are on carnivore, they always advocate mostly for animal-based nutrition. And there is evidence to show that higher amounts of protein in their diet also elevates some kind of ketone bodies. But my question is, why are people avoiding the most nutritious food on the planet, which everyone will tell you is fruits or vegetables? And how do we expect to be healthy when we avoid plant-based foods?
That's an interesting one, and I somewhat disagree with that, to a degree,
Me too.
in that it's a strong argument either way. My belief is that within a carnivore diet, you will get all the nutrients you need to live a very healthy life. Um, and I would say my reasons for stepping back and arriving at a position of ketobore wasn't because I felt I was missing out on nutrients.
Mhm.
I think I'm gonna step it back a bit and almost think about the reasons why someone would initially go keto, and then why would they go to carnivore. I think a lot of people take the keto route for health reasons, often to lose weight. That is probably the driving force for somebody to look into and actually take that route. Um, why would somebody go extreme to carnivore? Well, it's generally an elimination diet. It's something that you can use to rid yourself of potentially autoimmune issues, because certain plants and certain vegetables will spike issues in certain individuals. Now, it gets complicated because that will come down to the strength of someone's gut microbiome. And somebody who would react, let's say, to tomatoes may find that the person next to him doesn't have any issue at all with tomatoes. But science has proven there are certain issues and certain um, parts of fruit, vegetables that will cause some people issues if they've got not a perfect microbiome in their gut. I hope that makes sense, CJ.
Yes, that does. And I would love for people who are listening to understand, take this a step further and understand why eating some kind of plants and fruits would be detrimental to someone's health. And
Okay,
we can get into things like lectin, phytates,
exactly.
phytoestrogens, oxalates, go on. And you can, I mean, the thing is, I have been advocating this for the longest period of time, but I haven't got that information to the masses yet.
No,
But yeah, we can just have like a general conversation, and I can step in whenever like I feel the need to, and just share some more things.
okay. So let's try and keep it as simple as I can. And you're
Hmm.
right. You've touched on that. There will be certain defense mechanisms, let's call it, in plants that are there to actually, make sure the plant itself fulfills its purpose. So let's take a tomato, for instance. As a tomato grows, the tomato does want to be eaten. That's its nature. And the reason it does that is it's a transportation that, an animal eating that tomato is a transportation system for the seeds in that tomato.
Hmm.
Now, while that plant is growing, it doesn't want an insect to be destroying the actual fruit of that plant. So that tomato has a skin on it that contains, best will in the world, a level of poison, and that
Hmm.
would be a repellent to an insect, to stop that plant being attacked before it ever fruits and fulfills its objective. And the second interesting thing, let's still use the tomato as the example. The seeds in the tomato, they don't want to be digested. They actually want to go through the animal's digestive system and to come out the other end and to land in soil and grow another tomato plant. That's the life cycle of a tomato and its purpose. When you look at that in simple terms, the skin of the tomato will have certain issues for certain people. So those poisons, those, like you say, lectins that would be in that tomato skin that would stop an insect eating it, could and sometimes does cause an autoimmune issue and a reaction in us when we eat a tomato. Similarly, the seeds, our gut will try and break down those seeds because that's what it's designed to do. But the seeds are covered, the outside of any seed is quite a protective shell.
Hmm.
So that protective shell takes a long time for your gut to break it down. And the general consensus is the longer something is within your gut, the more chance that molecules from that food will pass through your gut wall and into your bloodstream. And then you're into the potential of autoimmune issues and numerous other issues from substances leaking through your gut wall.
Hmm. See, that's a brilliant explanation. The way I see how evolution is shaped, and you brought very important points to the table about how the seed gets transported and then it goes into a different part of the soil, and now there's new trees, and this has been going on for millions of years, right? So when you look
Yeah.
at plants and just people think that plants don't have lives, but I beg to differ. Yes, they do. They are somewhat conscious, and plants have been on this planet for more than 500 million years, and they came before human beings, so they had enough time to figure out how to survive in the cold, in ice age, in like summer conditions. And this is when we look at humans, like our survival mechanism, we have our legs and hands, and animals have the same. They have their claws, and they can run, fight, or flee from a problem or a predator. But when you look at plants don't have that. They don't have it, but yet they have survived with us for all these millions of years. And one
Exactly.
of the reasons that they did that is that having that poison in them that discourages certain animals to. So, here, everyone who's listening, here's an analogy, right? Think about this. You have a plant in the middle of, let's say, the road, and an animal comes to eat it, and then it tries once, and then the animal gets really sick, and or a predator, like certain plants have certain different predators, and the animal gets sick, and then a normal reaction would be not to go and eat that plant again and leave that plant in peace. And this is how nature has equipped plants with their defense mechanism strategies. Now, when you talk about tomatoes and you talk about like peppers and eggplants and different nightshade vegetables, they have a lot of things going on. Like you mentioned, the poison. One of the poisons that they have is, let's call them glycoalkaloids, right? And
Yeah.
these glycoalkaloids protect the plants from the animals, and they're very commonly found in things like potatoes, tomatoes, eggplants, peppers. And what is surprising is that just because people eat it, they don't realize that this glycoalkaloid group is also a neurotoxin. That means it's a toxin to your brain. It slows you down, it increases brain fog, and it also has enzyme inhibiting properties, which disrupts the breaking down of certain enzymes. Like some of these, like you said, the tomatoes, they sometimes have these chymotrypsin and trypsin and pepsin enzyme inhibitors. So let's take a normal scenario. You're thinking that you're having some, let's say you're having some meat and you're having some plants, but when you combine these together, and let's say you're healthy and you want to work out and you want to gain athletic performance, what happens is, just because you're eating that subset of vegetables, that enzyme inhibitors will not let you eat the protein or digest the protein from the meat that you're eating. So it kind of like is um, contradictory to a reason. And I see that, let's look at tomatoes again. They are also responsible for so many things that are happening in your brain, like motor neuron recruitment, contractions. It can, in extreme cases, like people with high sensitivities, they can even have extreme reactions like muscular paralysis. They can have insomnia, they can have like restlessness. Glycoalkaloids that's even shown to bind to cholesterol in the bloodstream, and they can rupture the arterial walls. So these things are very serious, but most our society has been shaping us in certain ways that um, we don't get to hear a lot of things about this. Then you have other compounds like phytates, and you have oxalates. And the thing is, when you have things like, when you go to your local health food store, I see most of the times when people are ordering a salad, they'll have like, oh, give me some more spinach, and give me some more
Exactly.
kale, and give me some more cashews. But what they don't realize is that they have a certain group, another, let's call them poison, called oxalates. And what oxalates does, it binds to calcium in the stomach and the intestines. And when it does that, it forms stones. And as a matter of fact, almost 80% of all the stones, like kidney stones, are actually calcium oxalate stones. So I think it's really good to like share this um, awareness about things. Then we have gluten, which is the most common commodity good on the planet, and is, I would agree that it's like one of the most processed food as well. And it's funny that a lot of my friends, like I am into health and wellness, but a lot of my friends aren't. So I'm always at dinner tables where everyone's just eating so much of bread and just so many grains, and then I'm the one who's always like, oh, sorry, I'm going to skip it. And everyone keeps asking me this question: are do you have any celiac problems, or are you gluten sensitive? But there's enough evidence to show that people who don't even have any celiac disorders have non-celiac gluten sensitivities, which kind of upset the, like you mentioned, the gut microbiome. It can increase things like, there's a compound called zolunin, which gets increased in the gut line barriers, and it opens up these holes in your gut, which is called the leaky gut syndrome.
Yeah.
And when these gut walls are opened up, there are so many toxins that can come into the bloodstream, and if you have a weak blood brain barrier, these toxins can lead all the way up to the brain. So it is pretty serious issue.
It is. I think the sad thing as well, we're in a society now where everybody wants to put labels on things. So,
Mhm.
and that makes things almost very black and white. So, for instance, somebody is either gluten intolerant or they're not, and somebody's lactose intolerant or they're not. Or certainly that's how people try and understand it. Whereas the reality is, we are all gluten intolerant and all lactose intolerant
Mhm.
to a certain degree. And sometimes you could be so intolerant that it affects you, it makes you ill. So somebody with IBS would avoid it because of the pains and the issues it causes. Now, it may be that somebody who has milk, dairy, and bread feels okay, but they're actually still slightly intolerant, and it is causing them an issue, but it's so minor, it almost goes unnoticed. And I think that's something that we probably have to educate people on, is that there's not a label for it. You know, my friend isn't lactose intolerant and I'm not. We're both lactose intolerant, but to a degree where it affects somebody that they notice it in their lives, or it affects somebody but not to a noticeable degree. And I think that is quite a concept for people to get their heads around.
Mhm. I've also seen certain plants like spinach, some vegetables. Like, I mean, I do advocate that people should eat. If you're not getting, if you're getting organic, then that's the best, like broccoli, cauliflower, and cabbage. But also these healthy, quote unquote, healthy vegetables have something called as goitrogens, which is another of
Exactly.
these poisons, which also sort of like disturb iodine metabolism. And
Yeah.
this is why you see a lot of people running around with autoimmune issues, fatigue, hypothyroidism, uh, poor memory. And like you said, sometimes we don't get the effects right away. But I would challenge anyone that if you're having lots of gluten or you're having lots of dairy, just try to monitor your performance for the next 4 days, because sometimes the reaction is so low that you get, after 3 days you get some sort of a reaction and you're like, oh, I don't feel like I have my right levels of energy, but you never trace it back to something that you've eaten like 3 or 4 days ago. Now, one of the other questions that I get a lot is, hey, our ancestors have been eating plants for the longest period of time, and then you have all these cultures that have are healthy. You see the blue zones, and they always advocate for a lot of plant compounds. And people say, like, hey, my city, my country, my town, my village, a lot of people are eating it and they're still fine. So what do you think is something that our ancestors did which was different? I mean, they didn't have glyphosate and all these other pesticides that kind of disturb our immune system, but what else do you think they did was different?
I think it's just evolution. I think if you take a culture that has developed with a predominantly plant-based diet, then through a long evolutionary period, that culture's actual microbiome, even in their gut, and actually how they metabolize food, may be different from somebody in another culture. So, just like the fact that genetically one person can differ from another in terms of their intolerance to some of these foods, it could be the same way with cultures, where a certain race of people that have, for 100,000 years, have predominantly lived off the land of plants, then that person now may have a slightly different genetic makeup from somebody from a different area of the world. So there has to be an acceptance that if we're all, as you say, about a plant needs to have its life cycle. Well, we're built and we're engineered to survive, and actually we can survive just on plants, but at what detriment? But what I'm trying to say is a person from one area of the world could have a very different genetic makeup and their ability to process and pull those nutrients from plants than somebody else. So there has to be a variance, and which is why the old adage that no one diet fits all. It really doesn't. There has to be a degree of self-experimentation, and I think the skill is to listen to your own body. If you're able to listen to your body and notice the subtle changes when you try different foodstuffs, you'll know what you're genetically built to be able to thrive on, or the opposite, to survive on, but survive on with issues.
Yeah, another thing that if listeners are interested, then you can go do a genetic test. Or I would even say more than a genetic test, you'd get more value when you do a food reactions or a food sensitivity test, and you
Yeah.
would see what kind of a reaction you're having to common foods like green peas, to tomatoes, to onions, to garlic, and then you can modify your life according to that. But one of the other things that I have noticed in many of the cultures is that they have been using different preparation techniques when
Yeah.
it comes to using plants. So you see all these old cultures. I completely agree with what you say, that evolution has shaped us in a way that all of these people have got some kind of a genetic variant, or the epigenetic modifications have made them survive with those kind of foods. But when you look back, when you look today, people go to the grocery store, they'll buy some plants or some vegetables, and they'll come home and they'll cook it, and they'll try to like cook it fast because everyone's busy and there's so much of lifestyle factors that take place. But people about 100 years ago did never do that. They were mostly soaking their vegetables, they were sprouting, they were soaking, they were fermenting, they were boiling. And we also know from science that boiling some foods can decrease the amount of lectins in it. When you ferment foods and break down the foods for like almost 48 hours, there's an 85% reduction in phytic acid. And then if you soak any of these grains and things for like more than 12 to 15 hours, that also decreases the level of anti-nutrients. So if you guys want to eat plants, I mean, it's a great way to go, but make sure your preparation techniques are really structured in a way that it gets those plants rid of all their anti-nutrients or poisons. Now, what are the kind of plants that you eat? Let me ask you this.
Okay. Quite simply, really, and I've done a lot of research on which plants contain the least amount of oxalates, lectins, and other issues, and it's quite a limited list. And some of it will be down to, again, how I personally get on with certain foodstuffs. So my list would include a very good base for me is mushrooms. That's always creates a very strong debate with the carnivore community, in that it's not meat, so people shouldn't eat it. The other argument is it's not actually a plant, so it's a very much a classification of its own, of fungi. And there'll be some people that will argue that there's certain issues with mushrooms, but they are so minor. And I think for a lot of people who do struggle on carnivore for various reasons, mushrooms, are a fantastic additive to, if nothing else, add some substance, some bulk, some variety to their meal without the inflammatory issues that some other foods could prove. So other foods. So I will eat asparagus. I'll sometimes have tomatoes that are skinned and seeded, and I think that's for me is a very strong piece of advice for anything like that. If you've got a plant that has got a skin and has got seeds, then you can probably 70% reduce the problems by eating that plant skinned and seeded. Cucumber's another example. I won't eat cucumber skin. I'll seed it. Courgette, another one. Aubergine, and it goes against some public, some general knowledge, we
Guidelines,
call
yeah.
it, that there's vitamins are in the skin of the fruits and skin of the vegetables, and that's something you hear a lot. The skin is where all the nutrients are. there may be some substance to that, but the skin is also where a lot of the issues lie.
Hmm. Yeah, I would also agree that the skin has. Everyone would say like, "Hey, have these banana peels and all these things," but they also have a lot of anti-nutrients, which is basically a protective layer on the plants or the foods by themselves. And it's funny because these conversations just keep on coming, and you have the vegans who think in a certain way and the paleos, they think in a certain way. When you boil it all down, it when you look into science, this is what we're talking about, is what is out there. And it's not just that Matthew or me are making this up. There are evidence-based scientific studies, there's research studies, there's clinical data to prove all of this, but it's not profitable, so not a lot of people talk about it.
Exactly.
What's your favorite kind of mushroom? I love mushrooms, but I like to drink mushrooms as well. So I will have things like, I just had lion's mane in my coffee, and
Yeah.
in the evening when I want to relax, I'll have some reishi. If I want some energy and ADP production, I'll have some cordyceps. What's your favorite type of mushroom?
I'm not too fussed, I've got to say. I like to mix the variety up, and sometimes there's a limit to what you can find locally.
Hmm.
I would probably, at a choice, for flavour, would be going for portobello.
Hmm.
That's easy to find here in England. They hold together well. You can do a lot with that type of mushroom, and again, they'll carry flavour. But I've not experimented too much with massive difference in varieties. Depends on the meal as well. I think,
Hmm.
if I was cooking a ribeye steak, then sliced portobello mushrooms sit well with that. If I was having maybe more of an Asian style dish, then I would probably vary it and look at oyster mushrooms and other varieties that suit that
I
type
love
of dish.
oyster mushrooms.
Yeah,
So, perfect. I think we've given people enough idea or curiosity to look into all these plant compounds. Now, let's move on. When we were discussing about today offline, one of the things that you mentioned to me was, how do you improve your fitness without exercise? And
yeah,
for a moment, that turned my head,
yes,
because this is one of the, I mean, as humans, 80% of us are lazy.
yeah.
Some of us are motivated to run the marathon and do a CrossFit workout and do other things, but that also comes in with some kind of psychological background. And when we are trying to overcompensate with something that has happened in our childhood, or we want to prove to the world that we're strong. But for the majority of the people, they just want better results in least effort and least time. So tell me, how do you improve your fitness without exercise?
Okay, yeah. So quite a concept. But quite apparent with the people I coach. So some of the people that have approached me for coaching for weight loss
Mhm,
are at a starting point where actually then they're not able to do what I would call strong physical exercise.
mhm,
And you put yourself in that person's mindset in the world we're in, where you are told how important it is to exercise, how important it is to move, um, and that again, that famous quote, eat less, move more,
mhm,
which I don't agree with entirely. You would think that somebody who have got themselves severely overweight, if they listen to all those messages, they may as well give up, because how are they going to lose weight
mhm,
if they're almost physically unable to exercise? So I totally disagree with that. The reality is your body, unless you are so severely overweight that you're bedbound, everybody moves every day. We
mhm,
from the minute we get up to the minute we go back to sleep, and even when we're asleep, our bodies are moving. Um, and the reality is, if you eat the right things and you actually eat the right level of energy, your body will arrive at a fitness level of its own. It has to find that balance, what I'd call your natural body weight, your natural physique. And I believe that exercise can massively improve that, but you can arrive at what would be a very good fitness level without actually having to push yourself into weight training, running, other sports that pushed your body along. Um, there's an element to me to think that that element of it becomes almost aesthetic. It's about how you look, um, which again, you know, is important to people.
Which is
But
what everyone wants.
absolutely, but I, I'd want to encourage somebody who was in that position of thinking, okay, I'm overweight, I want to lose weight, but I couldn't possibly run, and I
Mhm,
couldn't go to the gym because, not to feel that they're at a, you know, a point of no return, that they can't achieve what they want to achieve just by changing what they eat.
mhm,
Because actually, you know, if you get that balance right and you're eating the right foods, that your insulin, your ghrelin, and your lectin are all in the right balance, then your body will naturally arrive at a fitness level.
mhm. I completely agree. In fact, last I've been working out for the last 15 years, and I've been weight training, I've done CrossFit, I've done MMA and all of these things. But last year I wanted to test out a theory, which was how much exercise or how much formal exercise that you really need, because a lot of people were, they all around the world, they were stuck in their houses, they were just had a yoga mat, not a lot of people had access to a lot of space, or all the gyms were closed. So I went on an experiment of almost a year where I worked out only 2 times, 1 to 2 times per week. And I was able, just with diet and movement, just basic movement, to not only gain muscle, but lose fat and become fit. My VO2 max increased. And this was all in a very well structured way where I was focusing on, getting enough sunlight and earthing and grounding. I was having enough minerals. I was on the ketogenic diet, which also by itself upregulates so many of these genetic and protein pathways. But for anyone who's listening, try to think about this in perspective. I mentioned the blue zones earlier. These are geographical areas where people are living more than 100 years. And when you dive deep into the blue zones, none of them go to the gym, none of them lift weights, none of them do all of that. But what they're doing is just basic movements every day, like walking to the grocery store, walking with a friend and grabbing a coffee, walking or sitting down. In Okinawa, Japan, they have a culture of sitting on the floor and getting up. And now, with research, one of the most important longevity predictors is the sit stand test, where if you can sit down and stand up from the floor without using a lot of support, chances are you're going to live longer than people who don't do that. But there are simple steps that you can do in your everyday life, right? Like for me, what I personally do, and I would like to share this because I oftentimes travel a lot and go to a different city, and I would find ways to just increase my general movement, whether it's like renting a bike instead of taking an Uber, from moving from one place to other. And it helps me discover new sites, makes it less boring. I also stand up after every 30 minutes of sitting down, which is easy. Most of the times I'm on a standing desk. I also encourage that you get a coffee with a friend and go for a walk instead of sitting there. And things like, just if you're waiting for something, if you're in a queue, or you have to sit down, just stand, stretch those legs, get those blood flow moving, because sitting for extended periods of time has been even compared to smoking. And if you guys want to know some of the most advanced tactics, like for someone who is not able to do a lot of exercise, this could be the elderly, this could be people who are injured, who don't have the physical ability to move so much, put on things like blood flow restriction bands, which, and for me, I even put on blood flow restriction bands and go for a walk. And what that does, it keeps your body into this hypoxic state, which the bands create. And then you have this downregulation of these proteins called myostatin, which encourages more muscle growth. You become more anabolic. You have all these uh, blood and microcirculation factors like vascular endothelial growth factor. It's a complicated word for more blood flow, basically. You could stand on a vibration platform, which burns 1 minute of standing on a vibration platform is it's equal to walking for 20 minutes. You could use something like I'm drinking right now, molecular hydrogen, which has got anti-obesity and switches on pathways which are exactly the same, which gets activated when you exercise, like PGC1 alpha and PPRA gamma. So there are so many ways that you can just be fit. Like Matthew mentioned, the other big concept is NEAT. What is NEAT? It is non-exercise activity thermogenesis, which tells us that, and this has been proven, guys, that it doesn't matter how how much effort you put in the gym if you're not moving throughout the day. So what really counts in weight loss is like the movements that you're doing throughout the day, standing up and going to the TV to change the channel, or just, like I mentioned, walking with some groceries. And these are simple things, and they're for free. They let you connect to the environment, they let you connect to people around you. And guess what? It also helps you lose weight and not go and be in a gym. So those were some of my strategies. Now, when I was in the ketogenic diet and when I was transitioning into the carnivore diet, one of the most important things that I saw myself, like my body going through, was eating a lot of protein. Because there's also a limit to the amount of, I mean, if you're creative and you love to cook, I don't love to cook, but you're limited with the amount of fat that you can have also on the carnivore diet. So this was one of the major reasons for me that I got put off, because I was increasing a lot of protein. And when you look at the world of anti aging, having a lot of protein also upregulates a growth pathway called mTOR,
Yeah.
which again, it is being linked to all the diseases of aging. And basically, for anyone who's listening, is this pathway that upregulates growth so much, and you don't get into recycling phases like autophagy, which will clear all your cellular junk and makes you live and feel younger. But I wanted to know your thoughts on the ketovore and the carnivore and the keto diet, about the protein consumption. Do we have to have a lot of protein, or is it?
Okay. I've probably got some not radical views, but I've got opposing views to what a lot of people will believe or preach, really. In that,
Mhm.
and this is from experience, and I would say experience from coaching people. I think there's a great danger with overeating protein and not actually getting the balance right with fat. As you said, I think I've seen so many people who want to lose weight that have taken up carnivore that lose that initial maybe first month there's an initial strong weight loss, and then they stall and they can't understand why. And often when I've looked into their diet in detail, they're not eating enough fat and they're eating too much protein. Now, the
Mhm.
common line of thought is that your body obviously goes into gluconeogenesis to turn certain amount of protein into glucose for certain body and brain functions that your body does need a certain amount of carbohydrate for and glucose for.
Mhm.
Now, I personally believe that somebody who's having a lot of excess protein, I think the gluconeogenesis does provide more glucose than people think. And I think I've seen a lot of people who really high protein, and I'm talking people who've gone carnivore and just think fat is bad for you.
And
And
this is in the,
live,
sorry to cut you out, but this is in the absence of enough dietary fat,
yes,
correct?
yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. So somebody who's let's say a 90%, 80 to 90% protein, um, 10% fat, and minor or zero carbohydrate on a carnivore diet, that is struggling to lose weight. And my belief is that their overconsumption of protein is actually pushing them into gluconeogenesis and spiking their insulin response and causing them to fall out of ketosis. So my personal belief is that the majority of people, especially if they're not active, if they're not weight training, if they're not actually pushing their body and increasing their protein needs, are probably deficient and not having enough fat in their diet, which, as you've just said, is very hard if you're on a carnivore diet to get that balance right. Because ultimately, where do you find those good fats and make them palatable
Mhm.
at the degree you need to get the balance right? So that's the challenge.
And how do you approach your clients? Like, how do you solve this challenge? Are you looking at any biomarkers like blood ketone, or like beta hydroxybutyrate, or acetoacetate, or acetone? Are you checking all of these, or are you just what's your strategies to increase more fat in our diet? Because again, fat is such a overlooked thing at this point, because everyone, if you talk to a general person, they would say, oh, I don't want to eat fat because that fat will make me fat. But that's wrong. Fat is
Absolutely.
extremely important for almost every function of your body. Your you're basically made out of fat. Your brain is made out of fat. Your cells are made out of fat. Everything that you need, even like when you're talking about cognitive performance, you have these things in your brain called the myelin sheaths. And myelin sheaths are, let's say, let's take an analogy of a house, right? So you have this house, and then you have all these electrical wires going in, but now there's no electricity. So are you going to have some light? Are you going to have any productive? No, myelin sheath, just that. They need fat in order to operate. Your cholesterol, all your hormones, where there's progesterone, cholesterol, testosterone, all are made from fat. So it's highly important that we consider and we take fat into consideration and not just think about, oh, protein is the best because protein is going to make me build muscle. Because again, a lot of people don't know this, but just because you're eating a steak and you're eating like a fish or salmon or something, doesn't mean that you're always absorbing that. If you say that it's like a 40-gram protein, doesn't mean that you're always absorbing it, because there is a certain calculation which is called the amino acid utilization, which also occurs. And in most of the food, you would be surprised that you're only absorbing like 30% of it. And then the excess protein gets recycled and it turns to urea, nitrogen, and can be really hard for your kidneys as well. So
Exactly.
again, sorry, I just sidetracked this entire thing. But
That's all right.
what's your best ways to get fat? Like, what are your strategies?
Well, and I've got to say, CJ, it's one of the other reasons why I arrived at Ketovore, because it's difficult. So somebody who's gone 100% in on carnivore for whatever reason, and I think the two reasons will be to eliminate and have a very pure, clean way of eating, or to again, they believe that carnivore will be the fastest way to have a healthy weight loss. Those two reasons could force somebody down the path of saying, yeah, I'm only going to eat a carnivore diet. But how do you get your fats if you're going to be that religious about only being carnivore? So in that scenario, so I was coaching. Give you a good example. I was coaching somebody in North America who really struggling, had plateaued out, still had a good amount of weight to lose. And when I analysed what she was eating, she was living on fillet steaks. She was living and also what I would see is quite a large amount. Now, without me sidetracking into my beliefs on calories, I suggest my suggestion to her was to switch from obviously fillet steaks to something like a ribeye, and bring down the number of steaks she was eating, but cover that ribeye with butter or ghee or egg yolk, or make a hollandaise sauce that actually massively increases the fat content without it feeling too fatty. Because there's a palate side of this as well, that somebody who for years have not eaten fat because psychologically they've avoided it for various reasons, to try and suddenly say you need to switch to a fatty steak, well, somebody's not going to palate that straight away. That's something they have to learn and move into. So for somebody who I'm coaching that does want to just stick to carnivore, well, that's utilizing things like the fat in meats itself, and then egg yolks as a great source of good fats that actually make it palatable. Then probably easier for somebody, again, where Ketovore works, is to be able to say, okay, bring in some certain plants and things like mushrooms that I would call a carrier of fats. So mushrooms for me, so again, somebody I've coached that was struggling, plateaued, I've literally said to her, cut down your meat by 50% and fill your plate with mushrooms that again are cooked with ghee or butter, and suddenly your fat content has gone up. The mushrooms are extremely low in calories and energy, but they are a perfect carrier to make you feel you've had a substantial meal, but to bring that fat into your diet. And the biggest change you'd see in that is that fat massively increases your leptin release. And leptin, not to get confused with lectin, but leptin with a P, is the hormone that signals to your brain that you are full and you are satisfied. Now, a plate full of high protein won't necessarily do that. It will in small amounts, but the fat in that will release that leptin and tell your mind, I'm full. So, a good quote from somebody I've coached is to say, wow, I'm now eating half the physical amount of my plate, but I'm struggling to finish it. And the reason she's struggling to finish it is she's having leptin released in her, and her brain's picking up on that hormone and saying, I'm full. And that's because of the increased fat in that meal. So, and that's almost the perfect situation where, again, listening to your body, someone's able to say, wow, I'm full on eating less. And that person then, where that fat is in their diet, naturally burns body fat at a faster rate and easier than somebody who is predominantly eating just protein.
I would completely agree. Protein does have a thermic effect of food, and it does increase your satiety to a bit,
Yeah.
but that is only the physiological thing. When you look at hormones, guys, this is the key for anyone who's listening. There are different hormones in your body. There is CCK, there is leptin, there is ghrelin, and what I would love for people to focus on is these two hormones. Like Matt just said, leptin is called the satiety hormone, and ghrelin with G is called the hunger hormone. So when you're eating a lot of carbs and you're eating, you just spike your blood sugar and the blood sugar goes down, it triggers a physiological and a hormonal response, which makes you want to eat more. But if you had to really biohack this entire process, just like Matt said, it's like this advice is gold. Have a lot of fat, and automatically you signal these hormones from your hypothalamus that tells you, oh, well, that's it, I'm done. And this could also, well, we don't want to get into the rabbit hole of calories in and calories out, which I don't really agree with, but you will sort of like reduce your calories over a long period of time because fat will keep you satiated for much longer. Now, do you recommend, I know that you mentioned earlier that you were on some sort of a water fast, but do you recommend fasting with all of your clients, or how does fasting come in to the keto diet?
Yeah, I massively do. I don't think there's one hard fast rule about fasting that works for everybody, and I do think there's an element of finding out what works for you. To give an example, I think, well, first and foremost, anybody who wants to go down that route of fasting, absolutely for me needs to be in a position where their body is very fat adapted, that their body naturally burns body fat for fuel. And the other side to fasting is that you probably don't want to do a long-term fast if you've got a very low body fat percentage,
Body fat, yeah.
because that is your fuel on a water fast. It really is a technique to cleanse your body. There's many other benefits, but you predominantly need the body fat as your fuel to go down a long-term fast. Now, I think you've already mentioned about autophagy. I think that's the other huge benefit of fasting, that your body naturally, because your digestive system is pretty much shut down when you're on a fast. Certainly, once you've hit 72 hours, your body is looking for all its ways to metabolize energy internally. And as we've obviously said, body fat is the first area it will go, but your body will also naturally start to break down any damaged cells and other issues within your body, to actually metabolize those as well. So it's a fantastic cleansing process for healing. And yet, again, I think the average person shuns it and feels like the mainstream will tell you that if you fast, it's no different to starving yourself. And if you starve yourself, you damage your metabolism, and your metabolism will slow down. So there's a lot of scare stories about fasting that people will initially react badly to and say, oh, that can't be good for you to starve yourself. So I think there's quite a bit of psychological getting over that hurdle to say, okay, these are the benefits of having a fast. Is it just weight loss? No. Will it
Absolutely not.
Yeah. Will it give you other benefits? Absolutely yes. The danger as well, though, is that there's a few different variances of it. When I have a water fast, I'll take electrolytes, certainly the three main ones being
Mhm.
sodium, potassium, and magnesium, because without them, I think your body struggles, because you are essentially only putting water in, and you are flushing out your system every day, all through the day.
Yeah.
So those electrolytes are important to keep your body in balance, to prevent cramps and other issues, headaches. So somebody considering a water fast, they're the basics. Make sure you've got some body fat for fuel. Make sure you take your electrolytes. Don't drink too much water, but certainly drink plenty of water. And
Mhm.
again, depending on somebody's age, weight, size, that amount of water could vary. As an example, I would drink maybe 2 liters of water a day, depending on activity. And I
Mhm.
think the other thing to remember, CJ, for somebody who does want to consider having a water fast, especially an extended one, is that your body burns body fat on a very linear, set rate.
Mhm.
So somebody who's quite active, if they went onto a long-term water fast, could find themselves almost physically exhausted quite quickly if they're pushing their body faster than that linear rate that your body can burn body fat.
Mhm. I also see a lot of people falling into this trap where they're fasting for a long period of time, and they're not replenishing their body with any kind of full spectrum minerals, and then they exercise because they think, oh, if I exercise, I'm just going to lose a lot of fat. That
Yeah,
is correct, but that is when you're fasting for 16 hours or 18 hours or 20 hours.
exactly.
But as soon as you go over 48 hours, exercising and doing, because people don't normally realize how much they have to exercise and the volume and the frequency, so they just start to push themselves like they did before, and then there's an ego that comes in as well,
Yeah,
but it has diminishing returns. And I'm so happy that you brought this up, and anyone who's listening, it is, fasting is something that you do for yourself. It does upregulate energy, it does shut down ghrelin, increase leptin, it does, like Matt mentioned, turn on autophagy. It can also, it for me, it's a longevity strategy because it increases these groups of protein called sirtuins, and sirtuins are involved in DNA damage, and then it increases NAD plus, which is another enzyme. But at the end of the day, one of the most important things to know is that you're doing that fast for the well-being of yourself. So if you've told your friends, or you're trying to act cool in front of others, oh, I can do like a 20-hour fast or 48-hour fast, and you're not really listening to your body, that can have like serious issues when it comes to hormones. And normally it's harder to fix that than to not get into that situation in the first place. So that would be a piece of cautionary advice. Now, Matt, we're almost reaching at the end of this podcast, and it's been so great to talk to you. We share similar views. We highlighted things in molecular biology and nutrition and health and wellness. But now, for my last question to you, if you were to, if you had a like a like an advanced gadget or like some alien technology where you can reverse back time, and you could go back to your younger self, maybe when you were like 20 or 30, and you could give yourself maybe one, two, three, how many ever, but like at least one piece of advice, what would that be, knowing everything that you know right now? I mean, things not just from the nutrition and health point. You can talk about the spiritual aspect of it, the energy aspect of it, the things that you've seen when you were growing up your children's. What would be that one piece of advice that you would give to your younger self?
good question. I would say for me personally, I think, and I think a lot of people identify this, I would I would have said to myself to be a little bit more wary of the dangers of alcohol. I
Hmm.
think I think it's so prevalent in global society, and almost a crux for a lot of people. And I've been there myself, where I think there's a very much a clear difference between what I would call social drinking to emotional drinking. And I
Hmm.
think and I think it's also something people keep very, very secretive and almost self kid themselves that sometimes it's not a problem. But I know a lot of people that have stressful jobs and will almost every evening, every day, turn to alcohol to be their emotional support to ease their anxieties of the day and switch off. But for me, alcohol is almost a gateway drug, let's call it, because the issue with alcohol is, besides the fact that obviously in itself it's a toxin and your body has to process that before anything else, and let's face it, you know, your liver struggles to process that poison, but it does. The mental effect of alcohol can be one where alcohol will switch off that anxiety hormone, but it doesn't switch it off like a switch that turns it off. It suppresses it. And what I've learned over the years is that somebody who's used to drinking alcohol as that emotional crux will find that when they wake in the morning, that anxiety hormone that they believe alcohol is turning off is actually just being suppressed. So a little bit like when you wake up in the morning, the dam bursts, and often somebody who drinks in the evening wakes up actually quite nervous and anxious and almost self-perpetuates the day. So they go into their work mode. There's a little bit of jittery anxiety about them because there's so much of that going on in their brain caused by that build-up that they almost repeat the pattern. And they're going to have another anxious day and no doubt go back and have a drink in the evening to suppress it again. And I think that's a danger that is out there that is almost not talked about too much.
It's I would agree, it's a vicious cycle where you're constantly escaping from something, or like the word you mentioned, suppressing it, because alcohol, we know, like you mentioned, it does so many harmful things to our body. Your body is not able to break down the ethanol, and your liver struggles a lot, and then you have brain fog the next day. And most of the places where we see a lot of consumption of alcohol, we also see domestic abuse. We see accidents going up the roof. There are breakups, and think people don't have the patience to stand their better half or stand their boss, or just be in traffic, because all of their, like you mentioned, in the brain, when you drink alcohol, it turns on the GABA receptors, which kind of relax you. And then when you overconsume or you overactivate the GABA receptors in your brain, then the next day you don't get that boost again. So you're like you mentioned, jittery, anxiety, and things like that. And that changes your perception about the world. That changes how you show up in the world. And it also affects the lives of people around you, whether it's your family, your coworkers, and life becomes pretty sad. So I thank you for sharing that. And I think these days where people are spending more time at home and there is a lot of stress going on with the world dynamics, a lot of people would just turn to alcohol, and it's a downway street from that. So
100%.
thank you for mentioning that. And thanks for this conversation. I really appreciate all the work that you've been doing. You've got a great Instagram page. And if people want to get in touch with you after this conversation, probably someone needs some kind of coaching. What's the best way to reach you?
Obviously on Instagram, so at the Keto Coach. And I have a website as well, which has just gone live actually in the last few days.
Congratulations.
Which thank you very much. It's theketocoach.com or theketocoach.co.uk. Either will get you to me. And yeah, absolutely. Would love to help more people.
Yeah, and thank you for having that platform, because for people who are listening, you can read about things and you can YouTube about things, but if you're not working with a professional who is seeing real life examples, like which Matt mentioned, he mentioned about his clients, he mentioned about real life scenarios, because everything that you read in the book doesn't really apply, because there are so many other variables. There are just so many variables that you can't take into account in a scientific study. So I always encourage people to work with a professional who has real life experience and real life examples, because most of us are the same. So if someone else was facing the problem, chances are you'll face that problem. And the best way to shortcut it is to work with someone who's already solved it. And thank you, Matt, once again for being on the show. And this is me, CJ, signing off from Shift with CJ podcast. I wish everyone an energetic day. Be healthy, make the right decisions. And if you need help, just raise your hand, which I don't see a lot of people doing. Just raise your hand and get in touch with someone. Everyone loves to help. Take care, guys. Take care,
Fantastic.
Matt.
Thank you, CJ. Been a
Thank you
pleasure.
so much. Pleasure is mine.